Hi, I'm Bergeron, and we're out here today in the Northumberland Hills, a very rural part of Ontario. And behind me is a barn that's fallen down and a small garage that went with it. I want to talk to you today about the rules of composition, why they're important, and how to use them in plein air. So we're going to have a quick look at what this building is here behind me. So I chose this specifically because there's a lot of different elements here, things that you could include, things that you could exclude. You'll see that in the current video, the telephone pole is slightly right of center. However, on the right you have the fallen down barn. Left of the telephone pole you have the garage that's sort of in a state of disrepair. You also have the road, and there's some trees on the far left. So when we decide about what it is that we want to include in our composition, we don't have to include all the elements. This is your painting, this is your drawing. You get to decide what's going to go into it, and you get to decide what you're going to leave out. So for me, I would never stick this telephone pole in the center. It's just too distracting. So I would probably put the telephone pole on the right or on the left third. And this is where we need to talk about the rules of thirds, right? So in order to make your painting more attractive, the rule of thirds simply states that you divide the page from the bottom to the top in thirds and from the left to the right in thirds. And by doing so, you have created a painting or a grid for a painting or a grid for a drawing that will allow you to have the viewer have to look all over the painting or drawing to see the different elements. In other words, we're not plopping something in the middle of the page. And you see in this particular example, that garage is plopped in the middle of the page. So we'd probably be much better off having the garage slightly to the left and having the barn slightly on the right. In other words, taking that telephone pole and sliding it over to the left. So I'll try to zoom in here and show you what I mean by that. So if we slid that in that direction, you now see how this is a much more pleasing composition. You have the garage on the left, you have the tin building on the far right, and the barn sort of right of center. But no longer is that telephone pole struck straight in the middle of the composition. Okay? So this is a lot more pleasing to the eye, and it will entice your viewer to look at your drawing or look at your painting longer. All right? So I'm going to have a crack at drawing this and see what we get. Again, this one I think is going to be just a drawing. I don't think I'm going to paint this. However, as I say that, I'm kind of changing my mind already. I might like to paint those blue doors and that red garage, or rusty red garage, I guess, and some of the barn and stuff in the background. I see there's an old gas container up by the metal building, so that might be interesting to paint too, along with all that green foliage. So I would probably edit out most of that green foliage, to tell you the truth. All right, I'm going to get set up and maybe we'll start a drawing. Alright, so we're going to look at some of the rules of composition here, and again, I'm working on a watercolor paper. This is a Canson 140-pound watercolor paper, and this is my Sharpie pen. You'll find that I work on watercolor paper all the time for drawing, watercolor, acrylic painting, pretty much everything. I stick to the watercolor paper. So we're going to look at the rules of composition as they apply to this particular barn and this particular garage. So I'm just going to make a mark where I think a third of the page is. So I'm going to make a mark at the top and the bottom for each third. I'm not going to draw a line through there, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to say that's about a third, that's about a third, and that's about a third. And when I look back at my building, I see that I want to have most of the garage on the left, certainly the front of the garage on the left, and certainly the falling down barn is going to be in the middle here, and then that little bit of the tin shack is over here. And I'm going to take some artistic license with a lot of this, but essentially I'm going to have a garage that's semi falling down with a barn that's completely falling down in the background. And a lot of this is just going to be my personal feelings about this barn, the dilapidatedness of it, the fact that I'm outside in a beautiful day. There's not much shadow on this barn. There's not much shadow on the garage. There is a little bit, but I think I'm going to do most of this as a drawing, and I might do some watercolor, but I'm also thinking about I might do an ink wash on this, but that's all if it turns out. And I have a really bad track record of any of my demonstrations turning out. They don't turn out well for me, so I'm just going to start here with the telephone pole. It's probably the best consistent thing to put in your drawing or painting, and for me, I'm just going to do that, and that's it. All right, I am going to put the guide wires in and stuff like that later, but for right now, that's all I'm going to do. So I know that if I pay some close personal observation to this, that I have the front of it is going to come here somewhere, and the back of it is going to come back about here. Okay, and from here I know that there's an angle for the roof back here, and I know that if my back angle for my roof is that, then my front angle for my roof has to be fairly similar to that. I also want to make sure that I'm fully understanding that this is not a pristine garage. This is not the garage at your house. This is just a garage that is semi falling down. And then I'm going to put the other side of the roof in like this. There's some clapboards across the front here that I'm going to put in like this. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do for this, for the structure part. There is some beams that go all the way across, and then there's a couple of garage doors, but I'm not going to draw in the entire garage door. I'm going to put in part of the garage door, because if I do this later in an ink wash, I don't need to put all that information in right now. There's a very small window at the back here. That's sort of 2 panes of glass. And I'm going to darken those in right now with just some hatching. I'm just going to put in a little bit of hatching. A little bit more hatching like that. And that's pretty much all I'm going to do right now for this. And now I'm going to look at the barn at the back, and I can see now I have some landmarks on my page. So I have where my garage is, I have where the telephone pole is, and from close observation I can see that the far left side of the barn, not the part that's collapsed, but the far left side of the barn is about more than 2/3 of the way up the page, and it comes down and disappears behind the garage. So that's the side of the barn. The roof that's collapsed comes back this way. So I'm going to define that a little bit more right now. So this part in here is all actually roof. And so this comes not straight across. This comes back on a bit of an angle because it's sort of collapsed. Not sort of collapsed, it's collapsed. And then the far right-hand corner of the barn comes down right here somewhere. So I'm going to look at that, and when I look at it in the real version of it, there's the metal shed. So the metal shed interferes with this, and it comes across like this. It's on a bit of an angle, and then the front of it comes down. The front of it disappears into the weeds, and again there's another window here, and I'm going to hatch that in fairly quickly so I know where the darkness is going to be on that window. And this is all metal siding. So I'm just going to sort of indicate that a little bit here, just like that. Now I'm going to go back to the barn. The top floor comes right about here. So I'm not going to draw that in too harshly right now. And then right here behind this tin shed is a doorway. And there's a significant amount of darkness in that doorway. I'll put the beam, the overhead beam, and maybe just hatch this a little bit for right now. All right, now I'm going to come back over here to the barn again, and there's a huge door. And this door basically goes the full length of the top of the barn. But this top part has still got the door on it. So I'm going to indicate that like this. The bottom part here you can see into, and there's some beams that have fallen down, and they're kind of on different angles. So I'm going to put those in like this on some slightly different angles. There's also a little bit of a hinge sticking out here and a little bit of a hinge sticking out here, and you can actually see this where this is hinged and this is hinged. So I'm just going to put those in like that. This is very dark in here, so for right now I'm just going to hatch this in like this. And maybe we'll put some wash in that later. But for right now, that's all we're really going to do with that. There's a metal gas tank over here. And you can't see the bottom of it, but you can certainly see the top of it. And it has a little thing like this. And then it has a hose around like that. All right, on the top of this right here where the roof is collapsed is a break here. Then you can also see some of the beams inside there. This is all very dark in here. So again, I'm going to put in some hatching, going in a different direction than those beams that I drew in, because I want those beams to stand out, because you can see them. So again, I'm going to put in some hatching just across like that, and we'll darken that up again later. In here, where this is collapsed, you can again see some different little beams that are like that. And these are boards in here, but it's very dark in here. So I'm going to sort of indicate where those are. But I think I might use an ink wash or something to make that a little bit darker later. down here across the bottom is a bit of a stone wall, but you can't, I can almost see it, but the weeds are sort of blocking most of it. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. I am going to worry about putting in these barn boards, and however much of it you want to draw in is completely up to you. I'm not going to put it all in. I'm just going to sort of indicate where barn boards are rather than draw the entire barn board in. I'm going to come back to this for a second because there's some metal, it's a metal garage, so it's probably a good idea to do that. There's a couple of windows in each one of these doors, and there's some lines that go across each one of the doors. This also is kind of a clapboard roof, and this right here is all shingled. So I'm going to sort of indicate the shingles with just some scratchy sort of lines coming from each side like that. And for me, this is a really good start for a drawing like this. I'm going to say there is a transformer on this pole, and I think for me it's actually on the right, but I'm going to put this transformer on the left like this. And there of course is a couple of other elements on that pole. And there's some guide wires. There's a guide wire that goes from here down here, and there's another guide wire that comes out of the back of this and comes down this way. And both of these guide wires disappear into the weeds. So I think a really easy way to indicate these weeds would be to just watercolor those weeds in, rather than try to draw all these weeds in. Of course we can give it some feeling of a couple little wisp of weeds here and weeds there, but we don't really need to do too much of that. The other thing here is that we could certainly paint in this sky very blue fairly easily. But I want you to keep in mind that a lot of what it is that I want to talk about here is composition. So we have a third that's pretty interesting, a third that has some interesting elements, a third in the middle that has some interesting elements. We have a top third that has the roof, the telephone pole, the guide wires, the collapsed roof. The middle third has the garage roof, some of this roof element over here, and the bottom third has where the guide wires come in, a little bit of the gas tank, and of course the weeds that will be all across the bottom here. There's also a road that comes, there's a road here, so you can kind of indicate that there's a road with just some real simple lines like this, and we can paint that in gray if we choose to, because most of the road here is just gravel road. All right, I'm going to get my paint set up, and we're going to paint this a little bit. All right, so I got set up pretty quick here, and again, I have a tissue in case I make any mistakes or in case I need to blot anything out, and I'm just going to stick that under there. I have my water bottle, and I'm just going to grab up a little bit of water for mixing here, and I'm going to put a little bit of water in 2 of those little wells of my Sennelier watercolor kit. And I poured a little too much water out there, but that's okay. Just use our brush and pick it up. So I think I'm going to start with the sky here, and I'm going to take a fair amount of water. And I usually start with the sky, especially when I'm doing plein air. I almost always start with the sky because I like to have the blue pretty clean, and I like to paint a lot of other things in with dirty water, so, or at least do the underpainting with the dirty water. So I'm going to take a whole bunch of water here on my brush, and I'm going to paint it in basically everywhere except for this telephone pole and this transformer. I'm going to try to not get it blue. And I'm going to put in a lot of water here too. So at this point, it's not imperative, but it's certainly a good practice to try to get both sides equally wet. And sometimes you have to turn the page a little to have a look at it. And also understand that we're working outside. So this dries up. This is a bright, beautiful, early fall day in October, and it's unusually warm here in southern Ontario. I'm going to take a little bit of this blue and I'm going to mix it up in here, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker, and I'm going to give it a little test here on the side, and that's sort of the color I'm looking for, so I'm just going to get right at it. Put the blue in. Again, put the blue in on this side of the telephone pole. And then I'm going to hold my paint set up here, and I'm just going to tilt it a little bit and let that color run all through there. It's not moving quite where I want it to be here, so I'm going to just wet this a little bit more, just like that. And you'll see I got a little bit of blue on my garage here, so I'm just going to take my tissue and take that right out. It's kind of a neat sky that's happening there, so I think we're going to just live with it. We have a significant amount of green all across here, so I'm going to take my brush while it still has this slightly blue tinge to it, and I'm going to put that. The wind just picked up a little bit, so I'm going to put this, my tissue underneath there. I'm going to wet this quite a bit, and then I'm going to grab up some of this green right here. This would be a good underpainting green, and just, you know, understand that these weeds are not organized in any way, shape, or form. So when you go to paint them in, you should probably not be looking to paint them in any organized way at all. So here's some darker green that I just picked up from my paint lid, and I'm just going to dot that in like that. That's it. That's all I'm going to do with that. I'm going to mix up some brown. I'm going to take this dirty brown, and I'm going to take this dirty brown and I'm going to put it in where these dark patches are here. Like this, and I say dirty brown, but it's really sort of a dirty green, but it's still kind of barn-like, so I'm going to go with it. The roof of this little garage is sort of a muddled up, dark, crappy kind of a brown. It's like, that's actually pretty close. I'm gonna maybe make that a little thinner. But this roof is just that. The other side, just like this. And that's pretty good. And so this is sort of a very rusty brown building. So again, I'm using a little bit of dirty water, and that's sort of the color that I'm going for on this garage. And this color is here and here. So I'm just going to take this, and so this is wet on dry. We're just going to do that a little. And it's okay if that touches that green and sucks that green up a little bit, because those colors, it's sort of hard to tell where one starts and the other one ends. The front of this is sort of a cream kind of a color. But I don't really want to make it a cream kind of a color. These doors are this dirty, sort of mucky kind of a blue, and I'm just going to paint them in like that. I'm going to use the strokes left to right because the metal sort of goes left to right, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of this brown again, and I'm just going to go across the front of this just to indicate where the color might be. Put in a little bit of color there, and that's it. That's all I'm going to do for that. Really, that's it. And then for the barn, I'm going to start on the top here, and I'm going to use long linear strokes, and I'm going to try to keep it fairly loose and fairly quick, and again just indicate where the boards would be and not worry too much about painting in each individual board. This is plein air. This is not you're gonna fool around with this for several months until you get it right. This is down and dirty, quick, get it on the page. Now, if you've seen what I did here, I just used a little bit of that dirty water with a little bit of that blue to give it sort of a tinge shade kind of a look. And that's it. That's all I want to do for that thing. I'm going to mix up a little bit more brown. Here, pick up a little bit of brown. Sennelier brown is very reddish sort of brown. And we're going to get a lot of water. And I'm actually going to put some water. You see this water is very brown now. We're going to put some color in there and maybe just bleed a little bit of this into that. Now we're also going to take this brown and I'm going to put a little bit of it in there to indicate some darkness. I'm also going to pick up a little bit of it and wet it quite a bit, and I'm going to put it into this brown here that we have on for the barn boards. I'm going to have to wet this a little bit. It's drying up pretty quickly. I'm working really super fast here today because it is just about noon and the sun is baking down. And so I'm going to come back to this, wet this a little bit too, and again pick up some of that brown and just bleed it into that, just like that. That's it. And that's really it. Actually, this turned out better than I thought it was going to turn out. So I'm kind of happy with that. I have a little bit of brown leading into my blue up here, so I'm going to just take a tissue. I'm going to lean the page back a little bit, and the last thing that I think I want to do here, sorry I dropped my tissue. The last thing I think I want to do here is I'm going to put in a little bit of this gray road down here, and I'm going to put in some dirty water. And you probably think I'm a broken record talking about this dirty water. Oh, I didn't put anything in for this. I don't know if I need anything for this, but I'm going to put in, it's rusty, so put in a little bit of brown on that, just like that. And for this road right here where I wet this, I'm using dirty water. I'm going to pick up a little bit of black. I'm going to mix it fairly thin so it's very gray-like, and that's all I'm going to do for that. And I'm not even too sure if I want that, so I'm going to dab some of that out. And I think I'm just going to leave it like that. And that's it. So I think I'm finished with this. So again, I did the drawing, I figured out my thirds for the composition, and then once I started drawing it, I thought, oh, this would look pretty good as a painting, and so I just really just went for it really quickly with the paints. So if you enjoyed this, please click liked. Better yet, follow along so you can see all of the other things that I post. All the products that I used, links to those are going to be in the description below. If you have a comment or a question, or if there's something that you want me to cover in this video series, please leave a comment and let me know what it is that you want me to show you. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll check me out again soon. Thanks.